Is himself a legend, a showbiz pro with an old-time carny man's flair for bringing them into the tent. Colonel Tom Parker saw Elvis Presley for what he could be.
The world knew Elvis Presley as the king of rock and roll, dazzling, unstoppable, almost untouchable. But every legend has a shadow, and standing just out of the spotlight was Colonel Tom Parker. He was the mastermind, the salesman, the man who turned Elvis into a phenomenon. Yet Parker wasn't just selling a dream, he was guarding a secret. Behind the sequins and stage lights, Elvis was unraveling, and Parker's mission was clear: protect the image at all costs, even if it meant hiding the truth. Stay tuned as we unveil the truth. Colonel Tom Parker. Before Elvis Presley became the king, he was just a young man with a guitar, a truck driver from Tupelo who could sing like nobody else. But talent alone doesn't make a legend. For that, Elvis needed someone who understood how to sell him to the world, which led to Colonel Tom Parker. Parker wasn't really a colonel at all. He was born Andreas Cornelis van Kuyk in the Netherlands, and his arrival in America carried the fog of mystery. He reinvented himself as Tom Parker, claiming a military background he never had, concealing a past that was, at best, questionable. Some say he fled Europe to escape trouble with the law. What mattered to Parker was not truth, but appearance. And in that sense, he and Elvis were a perfect match. Long before he met Elvis, Parker had built his reputation as a carnival man. He knew how to draw a crowd, how to keep them hooked, and most importantly, how to separate them from their money. He sold dancing chickens, sideshow gimmicks, and circus acts, and in every venture the formula was the same: promise more than you can deliver, then deliver just enough to keep them coming back. That mindset never left him. When he discovered Elvis Presley in 1955, Parker realized he had found the ultimate attraction, not just a singer, but a once-in-a-lifetime spectacle. From the very beginning, Parker moved with the precision of a chess master. He eased out Elvis's early manager, Sam Phillips of Sun Records, and quickly maneuvered a groundbreaking deal with RCA. Suddenly, Elvis wasn't just a Southern boy with regional hits. He was a national star with records blasting through every radio in America. Parker controlled the publicity, the merchandising, the contracts. He turned Elvis's name into a brand, stamping it on lunchboxes, dolls, and postcards. But Parker's greatest skill wasn't just in marketing Elvis, it was in controlling the narrative. He decided who got close, who asked questions, and how much of Elvis the world was allowed to see. When controversy erupted over Elvis's hip-shaking performances on television, Parker spun it into fuel for fame. When the military drafted Elvis in 1958, Parker framed it not as a disruption, but as proof of Elvis's patriotism. A young man willing to serve his country like any other American boy. Every potential scandal became an opportunity for image building, yet Parker's motives were never purely protective. He took a staggering cut of Elvis's earnings, sometimes as high as 50%, far above the industry standard. He gambled fortunes away in Las Vegas casinos, and every time his debts mounted, Elvis's schedule mysteriously grew heavier, with more concerts, more tours, more money flowing into Parker's pocket. The Colonel wasn't just managing Elvis, he was milking him. Still, Parker understood one thing better than anyone. The Elvis Presley that fans worshipped was as much an illusion as it was reality. To keep that illusion alive, Parker would go to any length. If Elvis was exhausted, Parker called it overwork. If Elvis stumbled on stage, Parker blamed the flu. If Elvis's personal life cracked under pressure, Parker tightened the lid and made sure the press never saw. Behind closed doors, Elvis was vulnerable, a man torn between his dreams and his demons. But to the world outside, thanks to Parker, he remained the untouchable king. And that's what made Parker such a dangerous kind of genius. He wasn't just shaping a career, he was building a fortress around Elvis's image, brick by brick, lie by lie. By the time the 60s rolled in, Parker had become more than just a manager. He was a gatekeeper, a puppeteer pulling strings with ruthless precision. Even Elvis, with all his charisma, often seemed trapped in the Colonel's grip. Parker controlled the money, the contracts, the direction of the career. Elvis could sing and smile, but Parker decided where, when, and how. In many ways, Elvis's meteoric rise can't be separated from Parker's cunning. Without Parker, Elvis might have been a regional star, maybe even a one-hit wonder. But with Parker, he became a global sensation. The price of that transformation, however, would grow heavier with each passing year. For while Parker could sell the dream better than anyone, he could also bury the truth deeper than anyone. How Parker shaped the image of Elvis. When Elvis first stepped onto the national stage, he was raw energy wrapped in a shy Southern boy's frame. He didn't just sing, he moved, and that movement sent shockwaves through 1950s America. Teenagers went wild, but parents and conservative critics recoiled. Preachers called him vulgar, politicians denounced him as a threat to morality, and television producers tried to tame him by filming him only from the waist up. This was where Colonel Tom Parker thrived. To Parker, controversy wasn't a problem, it was a goldmine. Every angry headline, every scolding sermon only made Elvis more irresistible to the young fans who bought the records. Parker leaned into the outrage, letting it fuel the mania. He knew that in America, being scandalous could be the fastest route to becoming unforgettable. But Parker also understood something else. Scandal couldn't last forever. For Elvis to have staying power, he couldn't just be the dangerous rebel. He had to be safe enough for middle America, the kind of star a mother could hang on her living room wall without shame. So Parker began shaping Elvis's image into a careful balancing act, rebellious enough to excite teenagers, but wholesome enough to be marketable. This balancing act showed in everything Parker touched. He pushed Elvis into Hollywood films, lightweight musicals where Elvis played charming heartthrobs, usually with a guitar in hand and a girl to serenade. The roles were predictable, but they kept Elvis visible and profitable. Critics sneered at the movies, calling them formulaic, but Parker didn't care. Each one was another opportunity to reinforce the image. Elvis the dreamboat, Elvis the clean-cut leading man. Then came merchandising. Parker had seen how carnival attractions made more money at the concession stand than at the main event, and he applied the same principle to Elvis. If a fan couldn't afford a concert ticket, they could still buy a piece of the king. Lipstick with Elvis's name, wallets, lunchboxes, even board games. At the height of Elvis mania, the merchandise was said to bring in more money than the records themselves. Parker was teaching America that Elvis wasn't just a performer, he was a brand. And whenever the brand was threatened, Parker acted swiftly. When Elvis was drafted into the Army in 1958, it could have ended his career. Many stars had vanished after being pulled away from the spotlight, but Parker flipped the narrative. He presented Elvis as the model American soldier, humble, dutiful, willing to serve his country like any ordinary young man. Far from ruining Elvis, the draft polished his image. By the time Elvis returned in 1960, he wasn't just a rebel idol, he was a national hero. Yet the image was never the full story. Behind the polished photographs and cheerful movie roles, Elvis often felt trapped. He dreamed of making serious films, tackling challenging music, pushing his artistry further. But Parker rarely allowed it. Serious films were risky, and Parker hated risk. Formulaic musicals guaranteed profits, and to him, that was enough. Elvis the artist wanted more. Elvis the product was all Parker cared about. Parker also controlled how the press saw his client. Interviews were limited, questions screened, photographers kept at a distance if they got too curious. Any journalist who pushed too hard risked losing access altogether. For the most part, the press played along, dazzled by Elvis's stardom, eager for even a glimpse. And so the public got only what Parker wanted them to see, the smiling, charming king, not the restless man growing tired behind the mask. By the mid-1960s, the formula began to wear thin. The Beatles had arrived, reshaping pop culture with their creativity and daring. Elvis, meanwhile, was stuck in one forgettable film after another. His music grew stale, his reputation dimmed. Fans who had grown up with him started looking elsewhere. For a moment, it seemed the carefully manufactured image Parker had built might collapse. But Parker wasn't finished yet. He engineered a comeback, pushing Elvis back to television in 1968 with the now legendary '68 comeback special. Dressed in black leather, singing with raw passion, Elvis reminded the world why he had become a star in the first place. It was a glimpse of the real Elvis, less manufactured, more authentic. Audiences loved it, and the Colonel had successfully repackaged his client yet again. Still, the tension remained. The Elvis that Parker sold, the heartthrob, the hero, the brand, was never quite the Elvis that Presley himself wanted to be. And as the years went on, that gap between the image and the man would grow wider. Beneath the carefully crafted facade, Elvis was carrying burdens Parker had no intention of letting the public see. Fame had made Elvis Presley untouchable, but even in those early years, cracks began to show. Early signs of trouble. The world saw a golden boy, the polite Southern charmer, the clean-cut soldier, the movie star with the crooked smile. But beneath the surface, habits were forming, habits that would one day take control of him. The seeds were planted during his army service in Germany. Away from the stage lights, Elvis lived like any other soldier, but he also discovered something that would follow him for the rest of his life: pills. While stationed in Germany, fellow servicemen introduced him to amphetamines, little green tablets that could keep a man awake for long shifts, sharpen his focus, and ward off fatigue. For Elvis, they seemed like a gift. He had always been restless, bouncing between energy and exhaustion, and the pills gave him the drive to keep going. Soon, they weren't just about stamina. Elvis liked how they made him feel: alert, confident, in control. Back in civilian life, the pills followed him home, joined by a growing cabinet of prescriptions. At first, it looked harmless, the kind of thing half of Hollywood was dabbling in. But for a man with Elvis's schedule, the temptation to rely on them was constant. Colonel Parker saw the signs. He wasn't blind to the fact that Elvis sometimes looked wired or that he crashed after marathon sessions. But Parker had one rule: the show must go on. If pills kept his stars sharp and smiling, then pills were simply part of the machine. The Colonel never asked too many questions and never let anyone else ask them either. By the early 1960s, Elvis was struggling quietly. His mother's death in 1958 had left a wound that never fully healed. He had Priscilla by his side, a teenage girl he met while stationed in Germany, but even their relationship was complicated, lived out under the constant gaze of the public. To the fans, Elvis was perfect. At home, he was moody, restless, and increasingly dependent on medication to steady himself. The pressure only grew with Parker's relentless schedule. When Elvis returned from the Army, Parker pushed him straight into movies, then albums, then more movies. The Colonel's philosophy was simple: keep Elvis visible, keep him profitable. But the repetition wore Elvis down. The scripts were bland, the songs forgettable, and the artistry that had once defined him seemed to be slipping through his fingers. Behind the polished Hollywood smile, Elvis was frustrated. He wanted roles with depth, films that mattered, music that challenged him. Instead, he was stuck in an assembly line of fluff. To cope, he leaned harder on the pills, uppers to keep him going, downers to help him sleep, something for the headaches, something for the nerves. The cycle had begun, and yet to the outside world nothing looked wrong. Parker made sure of it. If Elvis seemed tired, Parker blamed long hours on set. If he looked bloated, Parker said it was a bad camera angle. The Colonel's gift was not only in building an image, but in protecting it, guarding it so fiercely that no one outside Elvis's inner circle suspected the truth. By the mid-1960s, Elvis was sliding into a rut. His career stalled as rock music evolved without him, and his personal life grew more complicated. The pills were no longer just a crutch, they were becoming a necessity. Still, Parker kept the machine running. New film, new album, new tour, repeat. For Parker, success was measured in contracts signed and profits secured. If Elvis was tired, medicated, or unhappy, that was a problem to be solved behind closed doors. The public saw Elvis Presley, the untouchable king. What they didn't see was a man quietly starting to lose control. And the one person who might have stepped in, the man who managed every aspect of his life, chose instead to look away. Parker didn't stop the cycle. He managed it, contained it, hid it. What began in the barracks of Germany as a soldier's shortcut was now part of Elvis's daily existence. The early warning signs were there, flickering like neon lights at the edge of Parker's carefully painted stage. But instead of pulling Elvis back, the Colonel tightened the curtains, making sure the audience never glimpsed the cracks. The performance had to go on. Prescription overdose. By the late 1960s, Elvis Presley was living two lives. On stage, he was still the king, the voice, the swagger, the dazzling smile that sent audiences into frenzies. But offstage, his world was increasingly built on bottles. Not whiskey or gin, but orange and white bottles filled with pills. Uppers, downers, tranquilizers, painkillers, whatever he needed to get through the day, to sleep at night, to silence the aches in between. The roots had been planted in Germany, but by the time Elvis returned home, his Reliance had grown. In Hollywood, where long days on set were followed by nights in the recording studio, pills became routine. Elvis told himself they were medicine, prescriptions from doctors who knew what was best. And in a way, that was true. Doctors did give them to him, often with little hesitation, which was due to his health crisis. But medicine or not, the sheer volume and mixture of substances Elvis consumed were far beyond safe limits. Colonel Parker knew. Everyone close to Elvis knew. They saw him pop a handful of pills in the morning just to get moving, then reach for something stronger at night to knock him out. They saw his energy spike into jittery highs, then plummet into near catatonic lows. But Parker's priority wasn't Elvis's health, it was Elvis's image. The show had to go on, and if the pills made that possible, then the pills were simply another tool. The Colonel became an expert in deflection. If Elvis stumbled through a performance, Parker told reporters he was exhausted from giving too much to his fans. If he slurred his words in an interview, Parker said he was under the weather. When Elvis collapsed from what was clearly a drug-related episode, Parker would blame flu, food poisoning, or sheer fatigue. The excuses were endless, and most of the press accepted them. Who wanted to believe that America's golden idol was falling apart? As Elvis's dependence deepened, so did his medical entourage. Doctors came and went, each one writing prescriptions, each one assured they were helping the king. The most notorious was Dr. George Nicopolis, also known as Dr. Nick, who became Elvis's personal physician in the late 60s. Dr. Nick insisted he was trying to manage Elvis's intake responsibly, but records later showed he prescribed staggering amounts of pills, uppers, downers, opiates, barbiturates, sometimes hundreds of doses in a single month. And still, Parker turned a blind eye. For him, the pills were only a problem if they threatened business. As long as Elvis could get on stage, as long as the contracts kept rolling, Parker saw no reason to interfere. In fact, the substances may have even served Parker's control. A sedated, compliant Elvis was easier to manage than a restless one demanding artistic freedom. By the early 1970s, the cracks were visible even to fans. Elvis's once slim frame ballooned, then shrank, then ballooned again. His face puffed from bloating, his skin sometimes pallid under the stage lights. On good nights, he could still deliver electrifying performances, but on bad ones, he looked lost, forgetting lyrics, slurring lines, mumbling through shows. Audiences whispered, but Parker spun the story as best he could. The king was just overworked, giving everything he had to the people who adored him. The truth was darker. The combination of substances was wreaking havoc on Elvis's body. He suffered from chronic insomnia, hypertension, and an enlarged colon. His immune system weakened, his liver strained under the toxic load. Each pill taken to fix one problem only created another, which called for yet another prescription. It was a vicious cycle, and it was killing him slowly. Still, the money machine didn't stop. Parker booked Elvis into a punishing schedule of Las Vegas residencies and national tours. Night after night, Elvis would summon what strength he had, walking on stage with a forced smile and pushing his voice into the songs that had made him a legend. Then he would stumble back to his dressing room, drained, where the pills awaited him. Some members of Elvis's inner circle, the so-called Memphis Mafia, worried about his decline. A few tried to intervene, urging him to cut back, to seek real medical help. But Elvis didn't want to hear it, and Parker made sure those voices never got too loud. Anyone who threatened the flow of the machine risked being cut out of the circle. Parker's message was clear: Elvis belonged to the fans and stopping the show was not an option. Perhaps the most chilling part was how normal it all became. For Elvis, handfuls of pills were just part of his daily routine, as ordinary as breakfast or brushing his teeth. For Parker, excuses and cover stories were second nature, rolled out whenever the public caught a glimpse of the truth. Even for the fans, who sometimes left concerts in shock at how unhealthy Elvis looked, denial was easier than admitting their hero was fading. By mid-decade, Elvis's dependency was no longer just a private struggle, it was a visible part of his existence. The man who once embodied boundless energy was now shackled to chemical highs and lows. But Parker never allowed that reality to touch the myth. The myth had to endure. And so, night after night, the king performed, sweating under the lights, his body buckling beneath the weight of addiction, his voice fighting to rise above it all. The colonel, watching from the wings, never flinched. For Parker, every show that ended in applause meant the secret was still safe. The audience never saw the truth. Parker made sure of it. Declining health. By the mid-1970s, Elvis Presley was no longer just a performer, he was a spectacle. Fans still packed arenas, desperate to glimpse the king in person. But what they saw on stage was often a shadow of the man who had once shaken the world. His jumpsuits, once symbols of youthful daring, now strained against a heavier frame. His movements slowed. The karate kicks and hip shakes that once scandalized a generation had been replaced by stiff gestures, sometimes just a shuffle across the stage. Yet the voice, when he could summon it, still had flashes of the old magic. On a good night, he could bring an audience to tears with a soaring ballad like "How Great Thou Art." On a bad night, though, his words slurred, his eyes seemed glassy, and the king of rock and roll looked unsteady on his throne. Behind the curtain, the reality was grimmer still. Elvis's body was buckling under the constant assault of prescription pills. He suffered from high blood pressure, glaucoma, an enlarged colon, and liver damage. Chronic pain plagued him, and the pills meant to mask it only worsened his decline. Insomnia tormented him, keeping him awake through long, lonely nights in Graceland, where friends often found him wandering the halls, restlessly searching for comfort he could never find. The colonel's solution to all of this was simple: keep working. Parker booked Elvis into an unrelenting schedule of tours and Las Vegas residencies, insisting that the show must go on. When Elvis faltered, Parker spun stories for the press: exhaustion, a flu, a minor ailment, anything but the truth. The colonel's greatest act of management was no longer building Elvis's career, but hiding the collapse of his health in plain sight. In 1973, Elvis performed what should have been a triumphant milestone: the Aloha from Hawaii concert, broadcast live via satellite to millions around the globe. On stage, dressed in his White Eagle jumpsuit, Elvis seemed larger than life, a global icon reaching audiences from Tokyo to London. The show was hailed as a triumph, proof that Elvis still reigned supreme. But those who looked closely noticed the strain in his movements, the sweat pouring down his face, the hints of a body already in decline. Even in glory, the cracks were visible. After Hawaii, the spiral quickened. Each tour seemed to take more out of him. The once lean, vibrant star was now bloated and weary, his face often swollen, his eyes dulled by medication. His temper grew unpredictable, his mood swinging wildly. Friends recalled nights when he would lash out in paranoia or fall into deep, depressive silences. At times, he seemed almost imprisoned within his own myth, unable to escape the role that Parker demanded he continue playing. The nadir came in June 1977 during a televised special later titled Elvis in Concert. Intended as a showcase of the king's enduring talent, it instead captured the heartbreaking reality of his decline. On screen, Elvis looked puffy and disoriented, struggling to remember lyrics he had sung for decades. His speech was slurred, his energy faltering. For many fans watching at home, it was shocking, a glimpse behind the carefully maintained illusion. And yet, even in that state, there were flashes of brilliance, moments when his voice cut through the haze, raw and soul-stirring, reminding everyone of the genius buried beneath the decline. Colonel Parker, ever the master of spin, dismissed the concerns. He insisted Elvis was fine, just tired, just overworked. To the public, he painted a picture of resilience, the king still touring, still giving his all, still the world's greatest entertainer. In truth, Parker was gambling with Elvis's life, pushing him to perform when rest and treatment were desperately needed, refusing to slow the pace because slowing down meant losing money. By this time, Elvis's dependence on medication was no longer a secret among his inner circle. Friends, bandmates, even staff at Graceland knew he was consuming staggering amounts of substances. Some tried to intervene, but Parker brushed them aside. When concerned voices grew too loud, they were cut off from Elvis altogether. The Colonel had built his career on controlling access, and now that control was a weapon to maintain the illusion. For fans, the experience of seeing Elvis in the 1970s was bittersweet. They still adored him, still screamed when he stepped on stage, still clung to the memory of the boy from Tupelo who had set the world on fire. But they also saw the toll. They saw the sweat-drenched jumpsuits, the moments when Elvis seemed lost, the whispers that maybe their idol was sick. Parker's excuses worked for some, but not all. Rumors spread, but few dared to confront the full truth. Perhaps the most tragic part was Elvis himself. He knew he was struggling. He knew his body was failing him, that the substances were consuming him. But he was trapped in a machine that allowed no exit. The weight of expectation, the iron grip of Parker's management, the relentless demand of fans, it all left him with no space to stop, to heal, to reclaim the man he once was. And so he kept performing, night after night, town after town, shuffling through the same songs that had once felt like liberation but now felt like chains. His voice, when it rose, could still lift spirits, but his body told another story. The story of a man crushed under the weight of fame, medication, and a manager who refused to let him rest. By 1977, Elvis was a living contradiction. A man adored by millions, yet isolated and fading before their eyes. To the public, he was still the king. But to those who looked closely, the truth was undeniable. The crown was slipping, and Parker's carefully constructed illusion was unraveling. For most managers, protecting a client means shielding them from exploitation. For Colonel Tom Parker, it meant shielding Elvis from the truth and shielding the world from Elvis's decline. How Parker covered it up. By the mid-1970s, whispers about Presley's health had grown harder to ignore. Fans wrote letters, tabloids speculated, even journalists hinted that the king was slipping. But Parker was relentless in his denials. Elvis is fine, he would insist, brushing off questions with a grin. If a concert review mentioned slurred lyrics or faltering steps, Parker explained it away as fatigue. If Elvis canceled a show, the Colonel called it flu, exhaustion, or an allergy. Always something ordinary, never the real cause. Behind the curtain, the Colonel was orchestrating a masterclass in cover-up. He kept access to Elvis tightly controlled, surrounding him with loyalists who knew better than to challenge the official story. Doctors who raised concerns were dismissed, while those willing to keep the prescriptions flowing were welcomed. Even Elvis's family, who occasionally pressed Parker to slow the pace, found themselves ignored. Parker wasn't interested in slowing down. He was interested in keeping the money machine running. Some of his tactics were brazen. After one particularly shaky concert, reporters asked if Elvis was ill. Parker snapped back. By framing concern as disloyalty, he silenced dissent. He even weaponized Elvis's fame against the truth. Who would dare question the king or his all-knowing manager? What makes Parker's deception so chilling is how ordinary it seemed to him. Covering for Elvis wasn't a crisis, it was strategy. Every excuse bought another week, another show, another payday. The truth that Elvis was drowning in substances and failing health was bad for business, so Parker buried it under charm, lies, and spin. And it worked. For years, the public believed him. Elvis's reputation as a tireless entertainer endured, even as his body crumbled under the weight of addiction. Fans saw only what Parker wanted them to see. A man still standing, still singing, still wearing the crown. But behind the curtain, the king was unraveling. And Parker, with his practiced smile and endless excuses, made sure no one saw it clearly until it was far too late.